Stay free with me, Russell Brand.
Farmers in New Zealand are protesting, and that protest is in some way being portrayed as being anti-ecological, i.e. these farmers don't want to take the necessary measures to make their farms safe. Gareth, I think this relates to COP27.
Okay, this is a point.
I do. I know it does.
I've not thought of this.
You won't have done, because I'm an investigative reporter, and you're a slouch.
I know.
While I'm investigative reporting, I investigate things, then I report on them. I investigate it. Then I report on it. You're slouching around.
I know.
Tell me now if my hunch that COP27 is significant here is correct.
Well, so, yeah, we've got COP27 going on. Biden will be there in a few days. Rishi's gone. Prince Charles has not gone. We don't know why. Whether it's connected.
He's not allowed to go because he's a king.
He's not allowed to be political, basically, is he? That's the thing now, as a king.
It's mental, though, because being a king is political.
Yeah.
I don't want to be political, but what about this thing where you're on top of a pyramid of power, sort of with a gold hat on your head, and we have to all give you money, and it doesn't matter who you vote for, you carry on being king.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking into COP27. What they achieve, this is obviously the 27th of these. They've been going on since 1995 or 1992, potentially was the first one. I know that my maths should do that better, but I think it's 1995. Anyway, just so you know, in that time, global emissions have gone up, I think, by 90%. So we're not at a stage where these COP events seem to be actually doing anything. So since 1992, when the Earth Summit laid out the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, carbon emissions have consistently risen. The only year this was not true was 2020, when the pandemic shut down large swathes of the global economy. This reduction was reversed in 2021. The system isn't working, and the failure of climate policy is a prime example. So I guess what we're saying about this is it's difficult. Climate change is one of those divisive subjects that people have varying opinions on for good reasons. But when you look at an event like COP27 and all the previous 26 COPs, it's very difficult to escape the idea that this is just another example, like we talk about the WEF, of greenwashing. So an example of that being a sponsorship deal between this year's UN Climate Conference and Coca-Cola, which has been described as the world's top polluter, has been branded a greenwash by campaigners. Coca-Cola produces 120 billion throwaway plastic bottles a year. 99% of plastics are made from fossil fuels, worsening both plastic and climate crisis. So again, in a sense, you can take the issue away from it, but you can look at these as being greenwashing events, as being just examples of mass hypocrisy.
Simply because they accept the sponsorship of companies whose actual policies and behaviour contributes to the problem that they claim that they're addressing.
Well, again, like government, I mean, just going back to the subject we were talking about before, if you have a system in which these political parties can take massive donations from companies like Meta and Amazon and all these kind of things, big pharma, how likely is it that anything's going to be done to actually make a difference with those companies? And when we get to a statistic like we've talked about before, whereby rather than the ordinary person not doing their recycling or getting in their car and going on a slightly longer journey than someone else, 71% of the world's pollution is caused by 100 companies, then, you know, you can't make sense of it in that way.
Makes you wonder, what would you really do if the goal was to reduce pollution?
Right.
What would be your objective? What would you focus on? Is it that you would accept money from, there's Coca-Cola, they're the main sponsor, but did you just say they're also the world's worst polluter?
Polluter, yeah. The fact that no one's gone, we probably can't accept money from them.
Look, you're the world's worst polluter. Can you stop polluting as much? Then we'll accept your money. Can we give you a bit of money to sponsor the event and then just carry on polluting as before? Yes. You can carry on polluting as before if you give us some money. So then, is our function to reduce pollution or to sort of help people pretend that they're going to do something about pollution?
Yeah, and then when it comes back to these farmers who are being punished, as I said at the start, one of the stated goals of these COP events is reducing global emissions. This net zero thing that we talked about in the item, where net zero is just another example of essentially a land grab, a way of like buying up swathes of land and just dumping all your pollution on them, essentially.
You should have a look at sort of what young Putin is putting up there. That, you know, so that's just for reference. Coke, world's worst polluter again. Now tell me, Gareth, specifically what you mean when you say that net zero isn't about reducing pollution, but it is about the appearance of reducing pollution and how it creates opportunities for land grabs. Because there's some complexity there, but some significance, and it's worth unpacking.
So again, WEF, UN, COP27, all talking about net zero, have done for the last few years. But net zero is not the same as zero emissions. So while the latter is what all companies potentially, you could say, should be aiming for, the former simply makes it look like you've achieved the latter through the use of accounting tricks. So companies continue polluting, as usual, while sticking to their net zero pledges, as long as they include carbon negative activities on their balance sheet. So to explain that, the problem is that there's very little regulation and standardisation as to what constitutes a carbon negative activity. Many net zero policies rely on purchasing carbon offsets, essentially buying up a load of land in a usually developing country, which will supposedly absorb the carbon from your other activities. So you go on polluting as much as possible because you've bought up this land that doesn't pollute.
Oh, I see. So you've sort of increased the amount of land average.
Exactly
We've got
that.
all that land that's not polluting.
Absolutely. But what you're essentially doing at the same time is a land grab.
Land.
You are acquiring land at the same. So while we're talking about these New Zealand farmers, where these government initiatives to lower emissions actually ends up bankrupting farmers, that land potentially then gets sold on to billionaires such as Bill Gates. You've got the same kind of thing going on here, and another form of, through methods of supposedly good intentions, you end up with a situation where you're almost forcing these massive polluting companies into land grabbing from across the world. So essentially you'll get land across the world owned by the worst companies in the world. And what a brilliant solution this is. And at the same time, you've got companies like Coca-Cola sponsoring that event. You can kind of remove the issue from it. We all want the planet to survive. We all want, good things for the planet.
A lot of people are cynical about climate change, aren't they? A lot of people say, well, no, it's that climate change is not being caused by human activity. And in a sense, I like to circumvent that argument by saying that we ought to live respectfully and in accordance with our planet and not generate regulations that clearly create pollution and are detrimental to the planet, even if it's not in a sort of a cosmological scale, according to that argument. It's sort of plainly disrespectful. But when you bring up the techniques that are used to allow them to continue to generate pollution in order to pursue profit. This is the bit from Global Witness that I like. Companies can continue polluting as usual while sticking to their net zero pledges as long as they include carbon negative activities. The problem is there's very little regulation or standardization as to what constitutes carbon negative activity. There's no regulation or standardization. The whole climate change movement is, of course, what it adheres to is this is based on science. And I'm kind of not a climate change denier. I think that, companies shouldn't be disrespectfully polluting and tainting our waterways, our air. Should live in harmony with the planet. We should prioritise that above profit. But when they say they're pursuing the science and look like this will be sort of offered up as, look at the kind of solutions that are coming out of COP27. That's not scientific. There's no regulation or standardisation. Many net zero policies rely on purchasing carbon offsets, which Gareth's just sort of described to you. That's what shows the duplicity and disingenuity of those arguments. That's what I think a lot of people who are now critical of what used to be regarded as centre-left neoliberalism, what they're criticising is, hold on a minute, they're just saying they care about the environment, but they're just creating more problems for farmers, as we demonstrated in Here's the News there, or they're doing unscientific accountancy tricks in order to appear more green. How's that even achieving anything in accordance with their own stated agenda? That's hypocrisy. That's lies. That's not true.
What's happening with this land as well that these companies are buying is often owned by indigenous people. So you're taking land away from indigenous communities that know how to use that land better. So when we're talking about someone like Vandana Shiva, what she'll say is, rather than these farming techniques of great big corporations and you've got Bill Gates coming and imposing his ideas on countries with these modern farming techniques, she says this is about the indigenous relationship with the land. And if you then buy all that land off people, essentially so you can offset your carbon emissions, you're literally taking that land away from the very people who know how to use it best. You might as well have this COP27 event and it could be literally a 20-minute meeting and then everyone can go home in their private jets again.
Right.
That 400 private jets that have flown across to wherever Egypt, where apparently domestic climate activists have already been locked up, by the way. So it's the perfect place for a climate event.
In reality, they're locking up people that actually care about the issue. They're flying there on private jets. It will take 20 minutes for them to just go there and go, listen, we're going to pretend we care about the environment now, only in ways that don't cost any money.
Well, or say, right, these 100 companies who are producing 71%, right, well, we're going to do this to you. And if we actually care about it, then we're going to make sure that you are fined record amounts of money, taxed record amounts of money until you reduce your emissions. If you really care. Whereas what actually happens is that those companies such as ExxonMobil, who are at the moment getting record profits, 20 billion in a quarter, as much as Apple.
In a cost of living crisis, where energy bills are soaring.
They get tax subsidies from the American government.
Oh, no, Gareth.
They do. They do. Shell, ExxonMobil, all those companies. So essentially the American taxpayer is subsidising these companies that are making massive profits.
So it's not like, they're big polluters because they're big companies and they got to that position through Moxie and Endeavour. They're getting tax subsidies in addition to profits. Can you see that there is no difference between the left and the right? Can you see there's no difference between the trucker protest, the agriculture protest, the Just Stop Oil protest, that we're all on the same side? That is the great revelation. We're all on the same side.
Well, maybe that's the unifying point, pointing out the hypocrisy. At the heart of all of this, the fact that you are, whatever side you are coming from, or whichever side you think is right, you are being ripped off on a massive scale.
You're being ripped off on a massive scale. COP27, as the New Zealand farmer protest show and as the information we've just shared demonstrates, is a greenwashing event. And whether you consider yourself to be on the left or the right, you can surely see that.
Watch entire episodes on demand for free at rumble.com/Russell Brand.